All right. Thanks, Steve. And yeah, so as Steve said, kind of going to stay more at the thought process level, where we're coming from, how we view the landscape, and kind of how we view this evolving over time, and how that informs the decisions that we're making today, and then kind of dig into where we think the industry can get better, and where we're facing specific challenges, and how we kind of plan on addressing those over time. All right, so a little background just about where we're coming from here. The first thing that, and I think we have kind of an interesting mix of agencies and advertisers and technology companies in the room, so kind of try to keep it at a level that speaks to everybody. But where we come from on the cost and transparency issue is when we step back from it, we view it as everybody has, or most of the companies that we work with in the traditional models here, the incentives are not aligned for the business. And what I think that's had, the effect that that's had on the industry is creating distrust. And the transparency is then trying to force that trust conversation because of the incentives that are not aligned between agencies and advertisers and technology companies. When we actually look at it, we think about, as our spend goes up, and to the right here, as our spend goes up, our revenue flattens out. Yet, as our spend goes up, just because of diminishing returns. So we're going to get those better audiences, better users first. As we get to more frequency on our users, the value of each new impression is going to go down, while the cost of each new impression stays the same. That's not the same for agencies, right, who are charging a flat percentage. Their revenue is just going to keep going up linearly. If we talk about companies that are serving as more as the buyer, who have those the retargeting companies who have direct publisher integrations, actually what happens to their revenue is that if you're focusing only on the traditional last click model of measuring retargeting, then if you focus on just those really high value users, those users are actually fairly expensive. It's expensive to get clicks on them. But as you increase your spend, you can get low value users and kind of even out to whatever the ROAS target is over a massive amount of spend. And so if you look at our profit line, our incentive as Overstock is to then stop spending at the peak of that green line. Whereas with the advertiser, or with agencies and with many of the technology players in the space, their incentive is to keep spending. And so how do we get the transparency that kind of allows us to meet at that correct place in order to spend the most efficient amount for Overstock, and how do we work with companies who are aligned and allowing us to do that? This is kind of when we look at how you could possibly do in-house over time, and what kind of each segment costs on the way from an advertiser all the way through the publisher, where all these different costs come in. It's really easy to say, oh, well, so-and-so charges X% markup. They all create value. This is not saying that each player along this path does not create value, but every company is charging, from the advertiser standpoint, our goal is to get as close to the publisher as possible. That does two things. One, it makes more money for the publishers, as Steve was mentioning earlier. That's a huge industry problem that has to get tackled. But if you look at this, if you're going straight to an agency, almost 60% of the value of your bids is getting stripped out before it even reaches the publisher, which diminishes the value of our bids, which means we have to go bid higher. If we can get closer to the publisher along this path, that allows us to go in and bid lower and still give more yield to the publisher. So that's really kind of our solid mindset on this is, okay, how much effort are we willing to expend going down this path? And in conjunction with that, what is the value to our spend of going down each further piece? Again, every single company in this chart, I think, provides more value than there is in each of these segments. And the question is, as the elements of the technology get commoditized over time, is there a way for us to arbitrage that value to create more value that we can bring back into our, our own Overstock pockets? And so you look, you kind of have Criteo and agencies at the advertiser level if they're serving as your buyer, or you can go and buy yourself. You can work directly with DSPs and have your own in-house buyers, and you're kind of cutting 12 to 15% of the markup out of that. You can go direct to the exchange level, which is what we've chosen to do at Overstock for certain use cases. In many use cases, we use agencies. In many use cases, we work with retargeting partners. We use DSPs. We're kind of across the board, but we do see the future going towards kind of this exchange level bidding. And the goal, of course, over time is to get our own header tags directly integrated into the publisher because that brings the most yield back to Overstock on our ad spend. So as we're going through kind of this process of what should we bring in-house here, the obvious choice was to bring retargeting in-house first. There's our universe of known users, and it is strategically important for us to know more about our users and what the value of them is than anyone else in the industry. We have more granular details about every single one of our users than you could possibly capture in a third-party pixel on our website. We know, we've been around since 1999, so we have, a lot of really long-term customers, and we want to make sure that we're giving them the correct experience, the ideal customer experience across their entire journey. So, one, I think we do know our customers better. Two, it's strategically important for us to know our customers better, which is why retargeting makes sense as a first play at trying to bring everything in-house. Then there's this vast universe of unknown users, and there's frankly, it's just really expensive to buy all of that data about users. It's fragmented across the industry. It's really expensive. And we don't see a great business model out there for bringing acquisition in-house. I think there are certainly paths through companies like MediaMath and the Trade Desk to go buy direct via the DSP, but it requires a much different level of expertise than bringing retargeting does, and so kind of that was our first step towards how do we learn to get into the programmatic space directly, both in technology and in buying. All right, so then we went through kind of this process in-house as we went through the path of bringing retargeting in-house. The first thing we did was we said, okay, what technology do we have today? And as a gigantic pure play digital retailer, we actually have a lot of the technology pieces that are required to go and build a programmatic bidder. We have lots of machine learning resources. We have massive data warehouses. We have huge Hadoop clusters that can do real-time streaming of data and the ability to deploy very large models in order to score your users and get their expected value and kind of all of the elements, the machine learning elements that make up a bid. So those kind of exist in some form. We have large data science teams of great people. Same on the tech side. So then we looked at what are kind of the pieces that would be required to go out and build all of this. We have recommendation engines that we use on our website. We have large CDN relationships. We have all of these different pieces that can kind of come together and actually form an ad server and a bidder or a bidding algorithm and our recommendation engine. And so how do we put this all together to actually get to the correct piece here? Then team selection. So as we're going through kind of what does a team look like for this, it starts with, okay, what technology do we need to build in order to put together some in-house programmatic pieces? Then, what do we have today as far as resources? And, when I kind of arrived at Overstock, I was really pleasantly surprised that we had, just these fantastic teams of data scientists and engineers who could go and kind of attack these problems from day one. I'll say it's probably not the case at every company. I think it takes a large enterprise to have those resources ready to go. But as we got through it, we kind of just reorged into a very small team that was kind of data engineering and data science heavy, and then with a couple of engineers, we were able to go out and put the pieces together to do some programmatic bidding in-house. And then vendor selection. So I think this is one of the most important pieces for us as to how we go out and choose who we're going to work with. We look at a bunch of different areas, and this is really why one of the main reasons why bringing technology in-house or bringing capabilities in-house is so important to us. We're looking for, first and foremost, all of our vendors need to enable us to have a cohesive cross-channel experience. So if we're working with a vendor that we can't manipulate at the user level to create compelling experiences across both, across email, API channels, push messaging, and programmatic, then that's not somebody that we want to work with. Two, we kind of have to have a rapid deployment cycle. So we don't want to spend, we are a retailer, and bringing programmatic in-house is not our top priority. It is a priority. So how do we get something that we have lots of priorities? How do we actually get something that we can go and deploy really quickly? Three, we're looking at probably most importantly, we're looking at extensibility and future proofing. We're not buying technology today for what it does today. We're buying technology for what do we think is the best position to have us in the correct place 3 to 5 years from now. And if that technology can allow us to tie whatever we're currently using, then we'll go with that. We're not buying for performance necessarily today. We really want to say, okay, if we have this grand vision of that every marketing organization in the world does of right message to the right user in the right time in the right place, and also maximizing profit. If that's kind of our mission, what are the pieces that we need to start putting in place today to be there in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? What's going to set us up best? And then finally, we are measurement obsessed at Overstock, and I think obviously more and more companies are getting down that path, but we want all of the data. We want absolutely everything from every single company that we work with. And so that's kind of the criteria that we go through as we say, okay, who are we going to work with in this particular area? And so I think that kind of makes sense as to why it was beeswax. We had the appetite at the time to go through and actually attack this problem. It's certainly not an easy problem to solve. We faced lots of challenges along the way, but it's also doable. And it is something that we feel is strategically important to us to go enable the arbitrage opportunities of the future. If I'm working with an agency today, for example, anything that I go and learn with an agency is going to make it out to all of my competitors at some point, sooner than later. And so how do I create kind of proprietary arbitrage opportunities that I can hold on to for a longer period of time for our marketing organization? And when you have that direct access, that's where it is. That's where we can be not fast followers to our competitors, but fast followers to the technology industry in general, to the whole programmatic industry. With our scale, I think that's a place that it's really important for us to be there. So you guys are going to be amazed at how easy it actually was to build all this. And the other thing I'll say about this is that it's also probably one of the hardest, conceptually, it's one of the hardest things that we've had to do at Overstock over the past year. But actually, integration-wise, it was fairly straightforward because as just a website, an e-commerce website, we have a lot of the pieces needed to pull retargeting in-house already. So we kind of you have the bidder piece, and that's one that we didn't want to tackle. I've tackled that before, and building a bidder is an absolute nightmare. It's really hard. You have to go out and integrate with all these exchanges. You have to go out. Maintain, I'm not a relationship person, as you guys might be able to tell by hearing me speak. But I really, going out and maintaining all of the publisher relationships or exchange relationships, it's really hard, and that's kind of not something that we have a team for or kind of a need for. But then integrating them all the same, where there's always been this kind of promise of open RTB, and nobody actually follows it. There's a million different extensions on every different exchange. And that doesn't even speak to just the complexity of being able to handle all of the QPS required and the expense of doing it. And so what we were able to do with Beeswax was put in kind of filters in place as to how much QPS we had to accept. It was very targeted and gave us immediate access to all of the exchanges, and then let us do whatever we want with that data in terms of how we're going to bid on users. And so we went and we took a lot of our existing Hadoop-based infrastructure, and we went and we put a lot of pieces around that in order to build a bidding ML. And then and then what happens is when we send a bid response back, we just send an iframe over there, and then we pop up a retargeting ad in that iframe. So the two pieces are actually fairly disjointed, but creating a seamless experience from the user's end, where we're not actually replying back with an ad to the bid request. We're just replying with an iframe, and then we'll fill that in when the content gets loaded on the site. So what are the pieces that we actually needed to build in order to bring retargeting in-house? Ad server. We have a website that is an ad server. That was the easiest thing we did. We just created a subdomain on our website, and we put a few ad sizes in there, and all of a sudden we had an ad server that we could go and serve any of our content to our retargeting users. And the scale of that is not dissimilar to the scale already on our website. We have kind of all of the enterprise features of that built into our website, and I imagine a lot of retailers out there do as well. The next thing that all of the retargeting companies will kind of sell is product recommendations. We're a retailer. We have product recommendations. We have our own machine learning for it. So when I go out and serve up an ad from our domain, from our overstock.com ad server, it's really easy for me to just fill that in with the product recommendations for that existing user. And because we have kind of all of these cross-device pieces built in on the back end and kind of our whole cookie infrastructure, we're able to just pull the cookie at time of ad display. We don't need to make that connection through the bid request, but we can actually at time of ad serving just pull the cookie out and go hit our recommendation engine and pull back the right products to show. And so it's really, and that is always getting tested for our website, so it's kind of always optimizing also just for our ad units on the same cadence as we get upgrades for our website recommendations. So it's really nice because I hate having to build things, so it's really nice if they already exist. And then finally bidding. So this was certainly the hardest part of it. We had our data warehouse. We had our machine learning engine. What we hadn't pushed into quite yet was kind of the real-time infrastructure. And this I think we'll get to at the end was just one of the most interesting parts for me of building in-house at Overstock and kind of the mindset shifts that had to occur there. But we built a real-time database and then a bidding algorithm on top of that. So in the ML engine, you're doing things like user scoring and time of day modeling and publisher scoring and trying to create all of the elements that will make up a bid in real time. so that you don't have to actually go through all of the compute power needed to calculate the user attributes at bid time. And we'll go recalculate those about every hour. And they get pushed into Redis cache. And then we have our bidding algorithm that runs. So we get a bid from beeswax, and we go hit our Redis cache. We pull back the attributes based on that cookie match. And then we feed that through our bidding algorithm. And we send a bid back. And we're able to do that all in about 10 milliseconds. That was the easy part. The hard part, I think there are structural issues with trying to bring programmatic in-house, especially at this level. I think if you're going at the DSP level, it's a lot easier. Once you go directly to the exchange level, data sparsity is a huge issue. There's a very strong Pareto effect in the publisher landscape. And so for those mid and long tail publishers, data sparsity is a huge issue. We don't have enough impressions, enough clicks, even after Overstock level spend, to confidently bid on a fair amount of the publisher inventory out there. So we still bid, but we don't feel confident in what we're doing there, and we think there's a lot of opportunity to improve that. Whether that's through using third-party data or having one of our asks to the exchanges is to include more and more publisher level data about viewability, historic click-through rate on those pieces in the bid request, so we can then utilize that. But not everybody does that yet, and it certainly kind of creates a big challenge when you're just buying for yourself. And then the other one is inventory. So again, we don't have a publisher sales team. We have a business development team that is great, that goes out and will do IOs with large publishers, but we haven't quite gotten to the point where we can take that and scale it across a significant number of publishers. And so it's very focused at this point, and it's something that we definitely want to scale over time, but certainly still a problem. The PMPs and direct deals, those are things that are kind of ongoing, but are hard to scale. And then header integrations, there's the whole issue from our perspective on header is we want to get closer to that, but how do we do that without like a co-op environment or something like that, where our scale is not sufficient to take up one of the 5 typical client-side header tags. And so we really need to get into either co-ops or get into server-side header tags. But we really do want to go all the way direct to the publisher, especially for publishers who are really strategic to us in the home space, which is the focus of Overstock.com. So outcomes. We saw the biggest component of savings and cost reductions was the data transparency. Due to the data transparency, I've been forbidden from saying exactly how much, but we cut our retargeting spend significantly. We were able to put in really serious incrementality testing just due to the data transparency that allowed us to take our retargeting spend to the correct level. And it was about 10% of our overall marketing budget that we were able to create in efficiencies, not just through that data transparency, but through a group of projects, and that kind of through a group of projects associated with this shift to programmatic and kind of the pieces that led to down the road. The overall efficiency of our spend increased 10% year over year. The most interesting one to me is what I kind of referred to earlier with the mindset shift. When you have to do something like the technology required and the mindset required for programmatic bidding in-house, it changes your mindset, from the product organization, the engineering organization, everyone, to one of, because it's so hard, because there are so many kind of cutting edge pieces required, And you kind of get to the point where you say, okay, well, if I can do this here, what can I do on these other channels across the marketing organization? If I have to, in Programmatic, compile an ad in real time, how can I take that and apply that to an email? How can I take this same infrastructure that we've built, and how can I go apply that to API channels? If I can bid at the user level on Programmatic, what can I do that gets me closer to that on the API channels? And so once you've built the granular architecture required for Programmatic, and you've captured that mindset of every single interaction is at the user level, and then even beneath that, every interaction is at the context plus user level, then that changes the way that you approach API channels. It changes the way you approach broadcast email. It changes all of the different pieces that you have across the marketing organization. And then you have this reusable infrastructure that you can go and apply to those problems. And so that's really where it's taken us is, I will say we've gotten to the point with what we've built on retargeting where it is as good as the other pieces that we use for retargeting. We still use multiple vendors for retargeting. The piece that we've built is now as good as performance incremental value-wise as what we've built everywhere else. But the additional pieces that come in and the mindset shifts and the forcing us to think about the world differently and the future promise of what we can do once we take those pieces and add header tags and apply that to acquisition, whether through our data or somebody else's data. We do think that that's where the world is going. We're not sure when it will get there, but it makes sense as the path of how we understand the world, how we can create arbitrage opportunities, and how we can actually get to a one-to-one experience for our customers that's consistent everywhere. That is what we demand from ourselves, and so these are the pieces that really, I think, change our view of the world and give us the pieces to deliver our brand slogan of just what she wants. And that's it for me.
Great, thank you very much. We have a couple of minutes for questions. If you have any questions of Craig. Did this process, so you're mainly retargeting off of the recommendation engine. Did that change at all? Did you gain any insights as to how, into the ways in which people were interacting with the creative itself, and any choices when it came to whether and how to use the recommendation engine, or just to use the recommendation engine to drive retargeting?
Yeah, so we played through static creative as well as our dynamic creative. Obviously, for testing purposes, the dynamic creative won. Then we actually, did get a chance to cycle through a lot of our different recommendation engines or different models. So, whether it's similar items, recommendations based on your last viewed or last purchased product, cross-sells, upsells. We have a bunch of different models, and in a typical retargeting ad that we went out and copied, you have a bunch of different slots. And so we've been playing around pretty significantly with what do you show in what slot. And expect to keep moving down that path over time, both in display ads and elsewhere as well.
Did you, just a quick follow-up. Are you down to the granular level where you would be able to make adjustments according to individual consumers and how they respond to different types of
Yes,
creative?
we do.
Okay.
We do today.
Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned that reducing non-incremental retargeting spend was about 10% of the overall marketing budget of efficiency that you gained there?
That one made up, I think, 3 to 4% of the overall marketing budget.
I was going to ask, how did that apply then to prospecting? Because I'm assuming that's also part of that. Did you reduce non-incremental prospecting, and how did you determine, did you use MTA? How did you determine what was non-incremental there?
Yeah, so we use, we have in-house MTA models that we use. We don't use the pieces that we talked about for acquisition, but we do kind of join all of the data in our data warehouse and look at MTA modeling, and we also look at incrementality testing. So we kind of, for incrementality testing, we'll take kind of the results of an MTA model, apply that return back to the channel, and then say, what is the difference between, for example, API channels are the big challenge here, right? like Facebook and Google and Pinterest. So how do you then look at the ROAS, the reported ROAS by the channel? How does that apply to our internal MTA model of the ROAS? And then how do you and then we'll work with kind of the big partners out there to run their incrementality tests and get to that ROAS that is adjusted for MTA.
Craig is going to be continuing this in a roundtable at the end of the morning. Please thank Craig Kelly. Thanks.